All right, we are live. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first episode of SFL Live. I'm Corey Massimino, a Students for Liberty campus coordinator, and I also study philosophy here in Central Florida. I want to tell you a bit about our organization first. Students for Liberty is an international nonprofit organization dedicated to providing students around the world with resources to promote economic, social, and academic liberty on their college campuses. SFL is a Big Tent organization. We train student leaders from all across the libertarian spectrum and embrace anyone who's interested in spreading the message of liberty. So this is our first show of SFL Live, a brand new Liberty.me live show where we will hear from various student activists in a roundtable discussion on the ins and outs of their direct action efforts, as well as their thoughts on some current events and hot topics. So students from around the globe will join us to discuss their own efforts at spreading the freedom philosophy in their own lives, their own communities, and their college campuses. So to tell you a little bit about our guests this week, tonight I'm joined by Liz. I'm probably going to butcher your last name, so I'm just not even going to try. Liz is a chemistry student at Simon Fraser University and a North American Executive Board member for Students for Liberty. She's the SFL Canadian Events Director, and her primary research interests include disruptive technologies, intellectual property reform, and religious freedom. We also have Nathan Goodman here, who has a Bachelor of Science in Mathematics from the University of Utah. He'll be working as a fellow this summer, where at the Fully Informed Jury Association. He'll tell us more about that later. He will be doing research for the Jury Health Index Project. He's also the Lysander Spooner Research Scholar in Abolitionist Studies at the Center for State Law Society. That's a mouthful. He's also a blog team member and a former campus coordinator for SFL. We also have Taylor Savala, who is a senior at Texas State University, where they study political science. Along with being a member of the Texas Students for Liberty Executive Board, Taylor works for the university's radio station, where they yearn to master public speaking. They enjoy Rothbard and usually label themselves a classical liberal. Taylor's often laughing at the term independent and can be found practicing their Alex Jones impression. Lastly, we have Dustin Brennan, who is a Georgist anarchist studying computer science and political science at Texas State University. He's commonly referred to as the last living Georgist, at least in our circles, but lovingly, I promise. He's also on the Students for Liberty Texas Executive Board as the programs manager. His research interests include proprietary and contractual communities, geo-libertarianism, and crypto-anarchism. And he's recently been focusing on introducing Georgist ideas into the greater libertarian movement. So that's our guests. And before we jump into the conversation, I just want to note that the views expressed here are solely the views of the students here. They're not the entire organization as a whole. SFL is committed to facilitating a broad dialogue for liberty representing a variety of opinions. So keep that in mind. And I guess we can just jump into what we want to talk about. I think, y'all, the first thing I want to talk about was, I guess it's kind of predictable, but the whole Rand Paul thing and the Freedom Act. I guess I wanted to hear from y'all about if you think the Freedom Act is an improvement or if it's even worse at this point. The original bill was pretty well widely supported by a couple libertarian-ish or libertarian-leaning members of Congress and libertarian organizations, but it's been kind of watered down after a few attempts. So do you all think it's still worth passing, or would you, like, if you were a member of Congress, would you vote against it or something? Taylor, do you want to maybe say something if you think the Freedom Act?
Sure. I find the word improvement really not capable of actually meaning what is happening with this whole extension of the Freedom Act, right? Like, to some people that may be an improvement. To me, I don't consider it an improvement, but I also look at the glass half empty. I think it's really interesting for Rand Paul and his numbers when it comes to his presidential bid. I think that it's probably going to show people that libertarianism works, even though he's not really a libertarian. But that's just how I feel.
All right, interesting. Nathan, do you want to tell us what you think? Do you agree with Taylor?
So I think that the gradual erosion and watering down of the USA Freedom Act really indicates one of the common pitfalls of legislative reform. A legislative reform, even if intended initially to expand liberty, is going to go through a series of compromises, have various unnecessary additions made, amendments made, etc., that will likely make it a mixed bag, possibly a win for liberty in net, but in many ways a reduction in liberty, or at the very least something that is very bad at restraining effectively the surveillance state that it was originally intended to restrain. And this is sort of a natural result of the perverse incentives of the political process. It seems to me that this indicates that the best way to deal with the surveillance state may not be to reform it, but rather to route around it. And the way we do that is with tools like encryption technologies. Rather than expecting politicians to safeguard our liberty, which is akin to letting the fox guard the henhouse, we should instead ask what we can do to safeguard our liberty. People don't typically go around seeking to restrain their own power, so we should be very wary of the additions to the USA Freedom Act proposed by the leadership of the NSA. And instead, we should seek to make the NSA's job of spying on us and invading our privacy as difficult as possible using all technological tools at our disposal.
Wow, that was a lot to take in at once. That makes sense to me. I agree. I think there's probably more hope in, I guess, more direct action, steps that we can take in our own personal lives to definitely keep us safe from spying rather than trying to aim at political reform. Dustin, do you have any opinions on the Freedom Act, if it's an improvement or not?
Yeah, I actually want to add a little bit more depth to this conversation. Recently, on May 7th, a Second Circuit Court of Appeals basically ruled that the NSA had stretched the definition of relevance and investigation too far, but they kind of held back on saying what they were specifically, going to say should be the repercussions of that, because we already had legislation pending. I think that timing is everything, and considering that this ruling just happened, it needs to go a lot further. Most libertarians would absolutely agree that, is it a step in the right direction? Yes, but is it enough? No. But given that this court ruling just happened, I think that with that paired, with a more in-depth conversation about all this, I mean, we can I think we can get enough interest in people to, kind of, call people and get people talking about it to, maybe, go a little bit further. The act itself, I mean, there's a lot of, limits. It's not. It's still there. I mean, they can still basically, do all the things that we consider atrocious. Just it's a little bit more difficult. And I don't really think that's much of a huge improvement. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there if anybody wants to hop onto that. I mean, it's that ruling kind of adds a different context to the conversation.
That's interesting. I didn't hear about that. I agree with you. It doesn't seem to do much. It seems to make it slightly more difficult for the FISA courts to allow the NSA to delve into our records. I mean, I think that at this point the bill has some vague wording, something like what they need a little more approval than they needed before. So it doesn't seem to get at the root of the problem. Nathan, did you want to maybe elaborate more on? I'm not really familiar with any of this kind of encryption stuff, but it kind of piques my interest as a more realistic alternative to the game of politics, though. Can you tell us more about that?
So I'm not particularly experienced in actually using encryption on my own communications, unfortunately, and what technologies are best. I know that a variety of civil liberties organizations did something called Reset the Net last year, which encouraged users to download a package of a variety of different encryption technologies, and some of these include tools like Tor, which is an anonymization service that sort of anonymizes your online communications. Some of these are more direct. How much was missed of what I said? I hear my video was gone for a bit. So basically, there are a variety of different online security tools that can be used. Many of them are encryption-based, so basically what this means is when you're sending a message, it goes through a bunch of mathematical operations that make it difficult to decrypt unless you have the key, and you can encrypt it without having the key because of some somewhat arcane aspects of number theory, the major thing being it's really hard to factor products of really large primes. So those mathematical facts wind up making it fairly straightforward with a bit of number theory to take a message, make it essentially illegible to anyone who doesn't have a particular key, and then have it be very straightforward to decrypt if you have the key.
Interesting. Dustin, do you have any opinion on this? Because it says I know you're interested in crypto anarchism, so I feel like you might have some interesting things to say on this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I guess one thing about encryption is, at least, I mean, a while back, it wasn't easy for the average user. I think that what's going to make things like, actually changing in the market, I guess pulling something from my head, I know that I think Gmail recently was talking about implementing like PGP or some encryption technologies like automatically into their emails that you can like turn it on and turn it off. Things that we kind of use every day that we don't realize are involved with this encryption, like HTTPS. When you're browsing around, and you're doing something on a website, when you're browsing regular HTTP, it's kind of open to anybody and everybody that has the, the basic know-how to get it. When you're doing HTTPS, it obviously makes it much more difficult. It's encrypted, and you don't really need to do much other than add an S. And that's a small step, but there's a lot of things that are catching on and getting like more popular. But we can talk about like what makes encryption and why it's important and everything. But the big question is like the things like Text Secure and Red Phone, on Android, or things like that. When people start realizing that it's not difficult to keep your stuff private. Right now, I think it's people are kind of pushed to just kind of keep their stuff in the open. With the Facebook generation and MySpace, everybody's kind of like, hey, I'm just going to put anything and everything on Facebook. But people understand the need for that privacy. And when things start becoming more mainstream for encryption, and it's just kind of like a natural everyday part of life, I think that's when we're actually going to start seeing these changes. So, I think that the mainstream internet companies and stuff, I think they need to start pushing. I think it's, if I'm not mistaken, Amazon. I think there's a few other websites like where it won't let you to browse in HTTPS. So, there's a lot of things that need to like move forward, and we can be the beginning of that conversation,
Interesting. Nathan, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just note that for the HTTPS change, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, I believe, has a tool called HTTPS Everywhere that just makes HTTPS your default for all of your browsing. And there are a variety of tools like that that are promoted by groups like the Electronic Frontier Foundation.
Yeah.
Awesome, interesting. Wow, this is interesting stuff. I don't know much about cryptography, so this is all good to know. It looks like we lost Liz for a sec. She's trying to get a better connection, so hopefully she can get back on. But in the meantime, I guess I kind of wanted to switch the conversation. Taylor, you had mentioned, you commented on Rand Paul and talked about his libertarianism when you were commenting on the Freedom Act. So do you all have any more opinions on Rand Paul or about how the past week has affected? Has your opinions changed on him, maybe, and based on what he's done in the past week? Taylor, you can go ahead first.
He's just like Rand Paul. Like he's always just kind of been like the same character to me. Like no matter if he's doing a filibuster, I can recognize that the filibuster exists, but it doesn't really change how I feel about him. I don't know. I guess it's really interesting the fact that he is kind of taking this stance in a two-party deemed system, and he's really appealing to students, which I find really interesting. However, today, jokingly on my desk at work, I have this bracelet that says "Stand with Rand" on it. I satirically support Rand. I would never actually vote for him, but I love to do the hashtag, and I love to kind of I know it's really embarrassing. Anyways, this coworker of mine didn't actually recognize Rand Paul, and it was really interesting. She had never heard of him. She corrected me. She was like, "Are you sure you're not talking about Ron Paul?" And I was like, "Oh no, they're two different, distinct individuals." But Yeah, that's basically how I feel about
That's
Rand Paul. I don't
that's
know.
pretty funny. That's kind of amusing that you like to use the hashtag ironically, though. I mean, it's funny to me though. Nathan, do you have any thoughts on Rand?
Trying to unmute my mic.
We can hear you, I think.
Okay, am I audible?
Yeah, go ahead.
Excellent, sweet. I thought I muted myself. But I would first want to be clear that SFL as an organization does not take any stances on any candidates, but my position on Rand Paul is similar to my position on all electoral politics, which is I am skeptical of electoral politics, particularly of the election of politicians. At best, it is a defensive measure to marginally decrease the extent to which people oppress you, but I don't recognize the right of any politician to rule over me. I think that whatever office Rand Paul runs for, whether it's the Senate or the presidency, is a office that should not exist, and I think that Rand Paul would arguably be able to do a lot more good, assuming his sights were set on doing good and improving the prospects for liberty, by moving into the realm of something that does not involve having the power to exercise authority and force over other human beings, whether that would be putting more of his energies into his medical practice or writing, although his book was largely plagiarized, albeit the plagiarism that was caught was from some pretty good sources, so at least he chose to plagiarize good material. But I think he would be better off doing stuff like that rather than acting as a politician.
Interesting. I don't know. I think I slightly disagree. I'm not really into electoral politics, but I mean, okay. So, for example, last year, or I think it was last year, when he did the filibuster for what, like 24 hours, it got so much attention and so much, like social media attention on Twitter and Facebook and everything. And to me, it seems like while maybe certain bills are simply reformist measures and don't really do much, like he got people talking. I mean, in that filibuster, he literally quoted Lysander Spooner. I mean, it's not every day we see that Lysander Spooner quoted in front of Congress or on C-SPAN. So I think there might be something said for like, at least he's like getting the dialogue going. I don't know. Again, I'm not confident that he'd be a particularly great president or something. If that even exists, probably doesn't. But I mean, do you not think that there's any value in him maybe getting the dialogue going and his little stunts on the Hill?
I think electoral politics as a pedagogical device is probably the best function it can serve. I think that both Rand Paul and his father, Ron Paul, served a pretty useful educational role. Ron Paul got lots of people talking about blowback. Ron Paul got lots of people talking about monetary policy in a way the economics of people like Murray Rothbard.
Right.
And similarly, Rand Paul, as you said, quoted Lysander Spooner and got a lot of people talking about drone strikes, and now a lot of people talking about the Patriot Act. And I think that's a good thing. And I think he's serving an educational role that potentially moves the median voter towards our position and gets more people aware of some really important ideas. So I think in that respect, the educational role that politicians can serve is desirable.
Interesting. Okay. Liz, you're back. Do you want to tell us your thoughts on the whole, we've been discussing the Freedom Act and Rand, and do you think there's hope in electoral politics and Rand specifically, or what are your thoughts on that, Liz? I think you're muted, by the way.
All right.
No, I can hear you now.
Cool. Yeah, I'm generally pretty apathetic about reform through politics. I mean, I think that politics is a platform, I guess. Like, it's a tool to be able to spread your message. But in terms of making meaningful change, I'm generally skeptical.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I agree. It seems like there's a trend. Dustin, do you differ from the rest of the guests on the use of electoral politics? Do you see some hope there, or what?
I mean, starting with Rand Paul, I don't like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I think that anybody who does something to bring attention to our cause, like just because they're not perfect doesn't mean you shouldn't acknowledge that they're doing something good for the movement. So bringing attention to the Patriot Act and to some of the atrocities that are committed, like in our name. I think that it's awesome, and you got to give people credit for that. As far as actually, like, I don't know, talking about the actual system of electoral politics and everything, I don't like to say I don't vote, but I rarely vote, I think is the best way for me to put it. There's got to be something really, really serious, or somebody that has really made me think that my vote is worth it, and that very rarely happens. So I'm just I put a lot of thought. If I do go to the ballot, if at all, I have not voted before, and I have voted for one person, and I've gone just to vote on a referendum. So I think that to me it boils down to the power centers. We want our movement to succeed, and one way of doing it isn't going to work. We have to have multiple ways. So the power centers of media, the power centers of the obviously electoral politics, the power centers of schools, those kind of things. We need to affect all of those in order for the movement to grow. So if it's not for you, I think a lot of people in the movement kind of they go through these phases where it's like, nah, I'm going to be in politics. Oh no, screw politics. And then they kind of look back at it after they've been in for a while, and they're just like, you know what? If you're good at the politics, do you? If you're good at being the philosopher and the ideals and a speaker, then do that. But do what you can do to contribute to the movement, and stop trying to kind of, split it up. You're basically fractionalizing it if you're saying that one way is better than the other. As long as we're kind of in the same philosophy. Obviously, we don't want to endorse things that we don't agree with and are absolutely against us. But with Rand Paul, again, I think he's doing great things by bringing attention to the Patriot Act. And just because I'm an anarchist doesn't mean that I can't say that.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely sympathetic to that view. There's probably something to be said for, I guess, a kind of division of labor in the libertarian movement, right? If you're good at something, then you should do that thing. That makes sense to me. If nobody else has any comments, last comments on Rand or the Freedom Act or anything, I think I'm going to change gears. There was no last comments on Rand. Okay, I'm not surprised. Let's talk about this new law that Kansas has passed. I'm not sure how many of you all have heard of it, but I will give a brief rundown of it, and I will also link the article in the Liberty.me chat so all of our viewers can take a look at it. So let me just read a bit. So Kansas Republicans put forward a new policy initiative, and it takes effect July 1st, and it will ban welfare recipients from taking out more than $25 in benefits a day from an ATM. So this is a lot more significant than it seems, though, because well, it's going along with other benefit restriction measures such as drug testing for welfare and food stamp recipients and other measures like that. But also what this is doing is by limiting their how much they can take out at the ATM per day, they have to have more transactions with the ATM. So they can't take out $50 at a time. They have to take out $25 at a time. And so the more transactions with the ATM, the more fees that they're charged, because as we all know, the banks charge those fees when you ever take out the ATM. So what this is doing, it's basically just transferring money that was being redistributed to the welfare recipients to big banks. At least it seems like that from what I can tell. It looks like the article says that assuming you could only take out $420 at a time before, you'd have almost a 10% benefit cut because if you added up all the fees that you would pay by taking the money out of the ATM. So I guess I just wanted to ask you all what you think of this. I mean, it seems on the one hand it's seems to be disincentivizing welfare, which is not something libertarians are usually for. On the other hand, it seems, I'm not sure if it's an improvement. So what do you all think? Liz, do you want to tell us maybe what do you think about this?
Well, first I have a question. Where did these people come up with the $25 in the first place? Like, who says that this is sufficient for daily sustenance? I
Yeah,
tried
it's
looking this
definitely
up.
arbitrary.
Yeah.
That's a good point. I mean, it is odd. Also, the article mentions that most ATMs in Kansas apparently don't stock $5 bills, so it effectively limits withdrawals to $20. It's even less than the actually legislated amount. So I agree. It's kind of bizarre. Like, it seems like an arbitrary place to stop. Taylor, what do you think of this?
Just like, what the hell, man? Okay, like, first of all, when it comes down to welfare legislation, I just like really want to try and understand the approach that these like legislators take, right, when it comes to writing legislation that they think is worth writing. Because writing legislation is a really tedious task. I mean, like, I did student government and like college. It like really doesn't compare at all. But like even writing student government legislation was just like really stupid and like ridiculous. And I just don't understand the approach and how 25 was chosen. You know, little tidbits like that that make this piece of legislation what it is, and why it has to exist, why these individuals feel the need to use 25 as the number, why individuals feel the need to write legislation about welfare like this, whether you be a Democrat or a Republican or an independent. I don't know what other categories I'm missing there. But am I wrong to want to understand why first before evaluating the whole welfare arguments?
No, you're not wrong. I agree. I don't know what their motivation is. It's not clear to me. I mean, the article on Vox.com says it basically comes to the conclusion that like the only motivation seems to be just to hurt poor people, and it would be kind of crappy to believe that's the case. Although I wouldn't put it past the government. But yeah, I don't know what the motivation is. It doesn't seem clear like what exactly like this legislation is aimed at doing, I guess. Nathan, what are your thoughts on this kind of thing?
Well, so it seems to me that this is an example of a more general set of ways that welfare policies can hurt the recipients of welfare. And that is that the recipient of welfare is subject to a variety of restrictions and paternalistic invasion of their life and their transactions, whether that's drug testing or the fact that food stamps have limitations on what specifically they can be used for. So it's not a lump sum payment. It's you can use this for these things. In this case, it's you have to face these heightened transaction costs, and you can only take out this amount per day. And I think the reasoning behind this is essentially that people are afraid that welfare recipients are going to essentially use taxpayer money for stuff that people don't like. It's abuse of taxpayer money, and this idea that you're subsidizing bad habits, and you don't want that. So you put all these restrictions on it. In this case, the restriction doesn't seem to have as much of a justification. It seems to be a bit of a type of argument, possibly just a general fear of, well, who knows what a welfare recipient could do with a lot of money in one big sum without having thought much about the transaction costs, or have thought about them and said, oh, they're a bunch of parasites anyway, they don't need to have more money. But what we need to keep in mind, no matter how much we dislike welfare and think that the welfare system is illegitimate, is this isn't necessarily decreasing the total amount of money transferred, the total amount of money taken by force from people through taxation and then given to
banks,
another person. It's changing that more of it is given to banks and less of it is given to poor people. So it's essentially saying, enough of this welfare for the poor, let's just make it into a corporate welfare program. And welfare already largely functions this way, right? Where you contract with particular organizations to provide services, or you have limits on where food stamps can go, so it essentially functions as a subsidy for agribusiness, where we're not giving poor people money that they can use to improve their life as they know how to do through their knowledge of their circumstances and time and place. Instead, it says, oh, you can't buy a bike to get to work, but you can buy this food from Archer Daniels Midland and from other farmers we're already heavily subsidizing. So essentially welfare functions as corporate welfare, And it functions that way because people are afraid of welfare being abused, and that fear of welfare being abused results in it essentially being designed in a way that is inherently abusive, both to the recipient and to the taxpayer, insofar as it winds up diverting resources towards crony capitalists.
Right.
I
Dustin?
just want to like applaud Nathan.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I could go for an applaud for Nathan like every once in a while. So, Dustin.
My first applause. Okay, sorry.
No, you're fine. Dustin.
Yeah, I guess to piggyback on a few things that Nathan said. One, I mean, it's hard for me to imagine any kind of welfare system that doesn't have a bureaucracy attached to it that is going to get bloated and out of control. You know, and that's with any of them. I mean, honestly, like, you know, it could be WIC, it could be like local things in cities, but like all of them are prone to, you know, wasted money, you know, self-interest, trying to take that money and put it back in the hands of the people that it came from initially. You know, and like, I guess I kind of want to like propose a question, you know, from everybody else. Is there such thing, or what is your idea, if you believe it exists at all, of a libertarian-approved social safety net? One that, you know, is the least bad, if you will.
I'll go first. I don't like that question, and I usually avoid it.
Well, then, if you don't believe in it, you don't believe in it. I'm just like, if you believe in it or not. I mean, I'm just kind of curious on, you know, what other people think on that, because there's very few. I have my own personal opinion, which I can address here in a minute. But I mean, like, every single one I can come up with, for the most part, is going to be prone to corruption and, you know, self-interest, and, you know, basically turning into a redistribution scheme.
Mm-hmm. Seems like
anyone else want to? Oh, go ahead, Nathan.
The least bad I can think of is some form of universal basic income system that's obtained either through sort of Pigouvian taxes, that is, taxes on externalities and other market values, or through a land value tax, if we're assuming it has to be administered by the government through tax funding, and that has various set constitutional limits so that this universal basic income program can't be continually modified by legislators in order to set up various paternalistic schemes and set up bureaucracies to operate. Now, politically, getting such a thing created would be very difficult, and from my understanding is there are still certain public choice problems with that. I think Pete Betke and a few others wrote a paper devising sort of a public choice critique of universal basic income schemes in response to people like Zwolinski and Milton Friedman and such, who have advocated these types of policies. But that seems like the least bad if you're going to have a state-administered social safety net.
Right. Liz, do you have any thoughts on what the least bad kind of welfare would be?
I think the best policy would be having no welfare at all. Personally, the best safety net is self-responsibility. Just speaking from personal experience, when my parents stopped helping me with my school, I felt like I just took care of myself better. Like I'm like at a loss for words. I feel that when people are given a chance to redeem themselves, they will.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's something to be said. I mean, I think there's, like Nathan said, there's public choice problems with some sort of basic income, but also there's the incentive problem. I mean, like you point out, Liz, what kind of incentive really would there to be to produce or something if you're just being taken care of, especially in the case of basic income, depending on the specifics, because like there doesn't seem to be. Whenever somebody proposes a basic income, I always hear that, but I never hear any specifics on exactly how it would be implemented or what the requirements would be, like to get approved for basic income. But again, that leads us back into the bureaucracy trap. With now we get into stuff like this Kansas bill. Seems like a no-win. Nathan, you say something?
I think another point with all of these is that they result in sort of an atrophying of systems of mutual aid that tend to exist when you don't have these state programs. David Beto has a book on this called From Mutual Aid to the Welfare State that talks about the history of actually existing mutual aid programs in the U.S. that existed prior to the welfare state. There's also some discussion of this specifically with regard to healthcare in Roderick Long's essay, How Governments Solved the Healthcare Crisis. So we've got to consider sort of what the non-state alternatives are for providing aid to people who are impoverished or down on their luck. And they exist. And even if you've got something like a universal basic income, that's going to mean higher taxation or some sort of diversion of resources that is going to crowd out the creation of these alternatives, which might be better, and we might expect to be better given what we know about how governments function versus how voluntary associations function.
Anyone else have any more opinions on welfare before we may move to a new topic?
I can touch on a few things real quick. You're talking about specifics. The Georgist kind of implementation of a citizen, of universal basic income is called a citizen's dividend, and the basic idea behind it is that when you take things like Pigouvian taxes or land value tax or things like that, you're saying that obviously we're throwing out that it's like the least bad tax, but basically the amount of money collected, it either goes towards public goods or goes back to everybody. And so that's it's kind of like the definitions in the name, citizen's dividend. If you're going to collect a certain amount of money from those least bad sources, if you have a minimal government, a lot of geo-libertarians will say we're going to have kind of a night watchman state and then like a minimal citizen's dividend, and that would be it. That would be like a Georgist minarchist kind of viewpoint. But I think another thing to consider is that we currently have a horrible welfare system. So, yes, we need, there were points before where there was mutual aid societies and churches and, and organizations that did it, but now those have been disincentivized because of this horrible system that we have. And so we have to get rid of that. And, and that's kind of one of the reasons I propose that, because if you propose, hey, we're just going to get rid of everything, that's a really radical proposal. And so kind of, having a point A to point B of getting it closer to and eventually eliminating the social safety net welfare system, that's, kind of why I brought that question up, because we have it, so it's, either get rid of it now or transition to something much more efficient.
That's a good point. I definitely agree. I'm not going to agree with all the specifics of the Georgia stuff, but I definitely agree with your overall view. Anyone else have any last comments on welfare before we move on? All right. I think we're all in somewhat close agreement on that issue. So this news story I wanted to discuss, it's quite disturbing. I will link it in the chat for the viewers. There you go. So apparently, according to CNN, 2 women are suing a corrections officer at Rikers Island in the city of New York, claiming that they were raped repeatedly by the officer with the complacency and consent of the city. I don't want to go into the details of this article. It's really horrible, and people can read it if they want. I will just briefly note, towards the end there, it says that a New York City Department of Investigation report found that more than a third of correction officers at Rikers were hired despite glaring past demerits, quote, including multiple prior arrests and convictions, prior associations with gang members, or relationships with inmates. That kind of just really struck me, that kind of just horrible statistic about the hiring practices there. And also here, 2012 Department of Justice survey among the 12 high-rate facilities nationally, it was looking into cases of sexual misconduct against inmates by staff. And according to the survey, which was cited in the suit we're talking about, 5.9% of inmates at the center said that they were sexually victimized by facility staff. So that it's just a jaw-dropping number to me. It's like, could you imagine if Apple was sexually abusing 6% of its customers? I mean, what would be the response to that? So, I mean, does anyone have any specific thoughts on this, on how this relates to certain libertarian views on the justice system, on prisons? There's also some interesting notions here about what role, if any, rape culture might play in the justice system. Taylor, do you have any thoughts on this thing?
Well, first, I think instances like this are just reinforcing the truth that this justice system that we have set up, this like faith that we're supposed to have in police officers and correction officers, is just completely misplaced. And I mean, that's just like where I would start, honestly. It's just a very horrific thing to happen, right? But like the worst part of it all is that things like this happen, and they have been happening, and there's just like all of this just like gap of, can I curse on this? I don't know.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, it's just this gap of bullshit that nobody is attending to. You know?
Yeah, I agree. It seems like, I mean, like the article said, I mean, how does that kind of hiring practice go about and like not addressed? I mean, it's obviously with the government, it's so hard to keep it accountable, but that's just absurd.
Exactly. And, you know, the worst part is that this is not going to be the last time we hear something like this, by far. And it's just mind-blowing that, you know, right now in 2015, people outside of the Libertarian Party are actually starting to question the foundation that the federal government exists on. And it's instances like this that are making people say, oh, well, wow, that's, you know, I don't think that is just a one-time thing happening in that certain city. I think that this is a pattern. And it's just like, yeah, you know what? I think this is a pattern too. But I don't know. It's just very disturbing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I hope you're right that it's leading for people outside of the libertarian bubble to kind of question the moral foundations of the federal government. I don't know if that's the case. I mean, I live in the bubble so enclosed. I don't know. To me, like the notion of you know, like supporting the cops or the justice system is kind of bizarre to me. But then again, I live in the bubble. So, but you're right. It's not a one-time thing. I mean, the article itself. Just to quote it again, the plaintiffs represented by the Legal Aid Society, they're seeking damages from Santiago, the person accused of the abuse, as well as an overhaul of Department of Corrections policy in order to break what they call a, quote, culture of systematic rape. And yeah, 6% of inmates at the center said they were sexually victimized by facility staff, and it's like, I don't see it changing anytime soon, unfortunately. Anybody else? Dustin, do you have any thoughts on what exactly this says, or what we can do about this stuff?
Yeah, when I was reading this, I actually started thinking about my military service, because it was an interesting time to be a part of, like, you know, when all these wars were going on, because you saw, and I hate to say it, like the quality of soldiers went horribly down, and like they started offering big bonuses. They started saying, hey, you know, we can give you 2 or 3 waivers, you know, for, you know, these felonies that you have. We can, you know, they basically just started getting the quality down, you know, and going for more quantity. They wanted like just more people, bodies to send over there. And I think that if you look at the way that our current kind of justice system is, it's like people are being punished for, you know, the drug war is a perfect example, for things that they shouldn't be punished for. You know, like self-harm is morally neutral, in my opinion. You know, like you can't say that the government has a right to, you know, get involved in those things. And, you know, when people are behind bars for that, and you have this, you know, things that people on both sides of the aisle disagree with and don't think people should be in there for, but they are, and they cost money to maintain these people and guard them, and so we spend our money on it, and it's, you know, and then they need these people, and then you start making compromises. You know, if we had a lot less jails, then there would be much better quality people running those jails, and, you know, it would just be a much better system. So I think that, you know, that kind of has to be taken in consideration. That was the parallel that I drew. It was like when I saw the, you know, the quality of, you know, the average soldier going down. When you have a big bloated, you know, justice system, and a criminal justice system where, you know, people are, don't we have like the most amount of people of our citizens behind bars or something like that in the world? Like, that's a crazy statistic. That's horrible, you know. And you know, again, that costs money, and it requires people. You know, and that's where, you know, a lot of this comes from. I think that, you know, it's a side effect of a greater issue, you know, of just a horribly managed and, you know, justice system that we have.
Liz, do you want to comment on any of this or?
Can you hear me now?
Yep. Yeah, you're good.
Okay, perfect. Well, just the very idea of incarceration just infuriates me. I would much rather see a push more towards rehabilitation, and that would kind of, mitigate these kinds of situations. It would definitely reduce the amount of prisons that are running currently today.
I was muted there. I just was agreeing with you. I think it's an interesting point. I'm not that familiar with the proposals for more a justice system geared more towards rehabilitation, but I mean anything seems better than this, right?
Yeah.
So Nathan, I'm sure you have a ton to say on this.
Yeah,
Go
so
ahead.
this isn't the first time we've heard about systematic rape at a prison, and it's unfortunately probably will not be the last. Prior examples include the Willacy Detention Center, an immigration detention center in Texas that Frontline did an extensive report on massive cover-ups of rape at, and more recently the Justice Department reported on horrific conditions and massive amounts of sexual violence at Tutwiler Prison for Women in Alabama. So this is just another example of what has been a horrifying trend. And part of the reason for this is alluded to in the article when they talk about the guards taking various measures to intimidate their victims for reporting being raped. So one example was the guards let the prisoners into these women's cells and called them snitches in order to try and provoke violence by inmates against these women for reporting that they were raped. The simple truth about prisons is that they feature full spectrum domination of the inmates' lives by prison guards. And insofar as there are areas of the inmates' lives that are not dominated by the guards, they are surrounded by an inmate culture that, for obvious reasons, wants to avoid interactions with the guards and thus heavily stigmatizes snitching. And they are governed, and so this essentially means that there's not a clear way to report abuse by guards or by fellow inmates. That means that there's essentially no governance system that is going to provide a decent response to sexual violence. So the basic problem here is inherent to the prison. It's inherent to having human beings with full spectrum control over other human beings. And it seems to me that it may well be that the only way to resolve this problem is something that will effectively be prison abolition. Right now, there's no way to voice your concerns within the prison, and there's obviously no way to exit. That's core to the definition. There'd be no way to exit the prison. And David Scarbeck, in his book, The Social Order of the Underworld, which is about prison gangs, proposes that you might have better governance within prisons if you set up competition among them and inmates can choose which prison they're going to be housed at. There has to be a minimum standard of security to prevent escape, but beyond that, you have a market where individual incarcerated people can choose which place they're going to be locked up. And this right of exit would allow a way to escape these abusers and would provide incentives to actually treat people decently. Right now, no such incentives exist. There's the Prison Rape Elimination Act, which was passed in 2003, but prison rape has remained rampant years since then, and with no end in sight, because the problem is fundamentally structural.
Wow, that's bad news, Nathan. You're kind of making me sad about this whole situation. So let's move on. Unless anybody has anything else to say about this issue. I think we're all in pretty much agreement. I mean, obviously about the horribleness of it, but I hope at least Taylor's right. It gets people talking about this kind of stuff. It definitely needs to be discussed more. I mean, a lot of libertarians kind of take for granted the certain functions of the government, but we need to figure out how to make those certain functions accountable as well. And obviously, Nathan points out that prisons are not doing that, and that they probably can't just inherently. All right, so let's move on. So the last news story I just wanted to briefly talk about. Um, so I thought this was kind of amusing. The House apparently just passed a bill about space mining. Uh, so to give a quick rundown, the Space Act would Or here's basically just the gist of the law. Any asteroid resources obtained in outer space are the property of the entity that obtained such resources, which shall be entitled to all property rights thereto, consistent with applicable provisions of federal law. So I kind of like the beginning of that, but then that last part about consistent with applicable provisions kind of rubbed me the wrong way, because then the article a bit more down talks about how the FAA might be problematically in charge of this in terms of its regulations and its licensing for who can do what in space. So what do you think? I think this might be a tough issue for libertarians. Can we really just let any corporation go into space and start mining, or what do you like? What can we? What's the libertarian approach to space law? Dustin, do you want to comment on that? I think you're.
Yeah. Sorry about that. I guess just off of like an initial thought, I guess I keep going back to Georgism, but I mean, whenever two people kind of compete, for something, like whenever, like the issue, I don't think is really going to be with asteroids per se. I think it's going to be once, looking, 10, 15 years into the future or something like that, when it comes to like Mars or the moon. Once there is like more space, like when we have like an extension of Earth somewhere else, that I think is when the real kind of like core philosophical questions of how things are managed are going to have to be kind of put into place. And because it's like, who, like who owns it? Who runs it? Is it a person who got there first? And if they, claim everything, then can they just hold on to everything? If somebody comes up there and just says, "Hey, no one's using the moon," and then just kind of like claims it for themselves, what exactly can we do about that? I think it's not something that's going to be solved in, a few-minute conversation. The only thing I can really throw into the conversation is that if there's any kind of like overhead or management, it would make sense to kind of use, the same philosophy that applies on Earth. If that makes any sense at all. I don't know if anybody else wants to hop on.
No. Liz, do you have any thoughts on the Space Act? What do you think is the libertarian solution to space law? How can we deal with this stuff?
Well, they have the property rights thing down pat. That's all I have to say, really. I mean, let's see how it goes. As far as the FAA is concerned, I would like to see more competition in terms of who gets to be the boss, I guess.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think it seems like it's prone to abuse, but with the FAA in charge of things. But I agree with you that it seems like the first part, the idea of, it seems like pretty straightforward. First person to mine the asteroid seems to have a just claim over it. Nathan, what do you think of this?
So, property rights serve a vital function here on Earth, so I'm really looking forward to see the operation of property rights. But perhaps more importantly, I think we should ask what sorts of institutions should work to preserve those property rights and to resolve disputes. I think that Congress here is operating on a view that the only way to establish law is through legislation and top-down regulation. And that's not true. You can establish law through the courts, through the common law, and through customary law. And that might be better for flexibly dealing with what is going to be a very rapidly changing situation. Courts are able to set evolving precedent that builds upon the facts of the case, whereas the FAA is going to pass regulations that are going to be very influenced by entrenched interests, and so that opens up lots of room for cronyism, and legislators are going to pass laws that aren't going to be able to accommodate the changing conditions on the ground or in space, as it were, and are distorted by very perverse political incentives. So I think that we should be asking what types of legal institutions are suited for this, and we should be considering options other than just relying on legislation and regulatory agencies.
Hmm. Taylor, did you have any comments?
Um, I don't really have an opinion. Like, reading articles like this reminds me of when I was in high school and I was on our team's debate team, and like there used to be this really good article about how Google is trying to create like a space elevator, and it's just like all the same shit to me.
You
I
don't
like.
have a strong opinion on property rights in space? It sounds so fascinating to me.
Okay. I mean, when you see, I'm just like, it's a property rights issue, and then whenever I'm like reading about resource extraction in space, I just like start laughing because all I think about is like how obnoxious I was in high school, because this is like the kind of evidence that you would want to just like bash like arguments. Like, I don't know. I am
Yeah,
desensitized to the whole space conversation.
fair enough. I agree it's a property rights issue. Most things are. Um, I guess I think that wraps up pretty much the news stories I kind of wanted to get your all's thoughts on. So for the last part, obviously as activists, we're all engaged in activism in our daily lives and direct action on either college campuses or in our communities. So I wanted to ask you all what you're doing recently, what kind of projects you're working on, what kind of activism you're engaging in. Nathan, do you want to tell us a little bit about what you're up to?
Yeah, so this summer I'll be working for the Fully Informed Jury Association, which is an organization that works to promote awareness of a juror's right to exercise their conscience and judge the justice of a law while giving a verdict, rather than simply evaluating whether someone has factually violated a sort of legislative edict. In other words, the right to jury nullification. In particular, I'm going to be working on what's called the Jury Health Index, which compares access to the right to trial by jury as it varies across the 50 states, D.C., and the federal government. So you might think, oh, well, I have the same right to trial by jury everywhere. Well, not quite. In Louisiana and Oregon, for instance, you don't always need a unanimous verdict in order to convict a criminal defendant. They allow non-unanimous rulings by juries. And in Louisiana, they passed this actually for explicitly racist reasons while they were passing other Jim Crow requirements and literacy tests for voting and these sorts of abhorrent laws. Actually, those who were profiting off of the convict lease system, that is, off of prison labor, were instrumental in pushing this. The idea was that they did not want a black juror to be able to hang a jury or to get an acquittal or to nullify. And so what they did was they prevented that from being a possibility by allowing for that juror's vote to not be sufficient to prevent a conviction, for a non-unanimous conviction to occur. So there are similar issues. There are other issues like juvenile defendants often don't have a right to trial by jury. In many states, they don't. So we'll just be ranking states in a project similar to sort of the Mercatus Center's Freedom in the 50 States project, or other sorts of state rankings that are done by scholarly organizations in order to evaluate sort of how are the states doing on access to the right to trial by jury, and where can they improve so that the jury can pose a real check by the citizens on the pernicious process of mass incarceration and prosecutorial overzealousness and misconduct and overcriminalization.
That's really interesting. I don't know a lot about jury stuff, but that sounds like really fascinating, relevant stuff, actually. I guess I kind of always assumed that, yeah, you have a right to jury trial everywhere. So that sounds like fun stuff. I hope you succeed and have a good time working for, what was the organization called again?
The Fully Informed Jury Association, or FIJA. Also, if you want a good place to start on jury issues, I highly recommend Lysander Spooner's essay on trial by jury.
All right. Well, you heard it from the Lysander Spooner fellow at C4SS himself. Taylor, do you want to tell us a little bit about Texas Students for Liberty?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
So, Texas Students for Liberty is kind of a Students for Liberty experiment. That's how I think of it in my head. But basically, there is now an executive board of directors for Texas. It breaks down between conference directors and then just individuals for regions. But of course, it's an incredible experience. I actually just went to the North American Executive Board retreat last weekend, and it was just really intriguing seeing the way that Texas is going to function along with the other regions that exist, and especially when it comes down to North America and then to Latin American speaking countries. I know we're really trying to work with a lot of our Spanish students in Texas right now that are in the valley or closer to the border. So that's something that is definitely going to be big on my plate is Estudiantes por la Libertad de Tejas, which is going to be reaching out to these specific students. Other than that, you know, these conferences that we're going to have are going to be incredible. We're going to be having 4 in Lubbock, Austin, Dallas, and Houston. And if you've never been to either of those cities, it's like probably going to be really great at every single one of them, just coming down to the kinds of individuals that we're going to get across from the entire state. I mean, I could go on forever, honestly, but all I know is that you should definitely pay attention to Texas, because if it is a super successful experiment, then it's just going to be really great. And then if it all falls and like burns and stuff, which I don't think that that's going to happen at all, but if it does, then you can say that you were there.
Yeah. That's awesome. Dustin, did you want to? I know you're another Texas SFLer.
Yeah, I guess just to kind of cap what Taylor was saying. Actually, tomorrow I'm going to be leaving and going up to Fort Worth for our the leadership retreat for our board. I think what is going to be important for us is to kind of define our boundaries. This really hasn't been done before. I guess the kind of specifics on how far things go and what we're going to accomplish and what our goals are pretty much going to be laid out and kind of solidified in the next like 4 to 5 days. So I'm really looking forward to it. I have high expectations. I think you should keep Texas just keep an eye out for us, because maybe we have delusions of grandeur. I know we're not perfect and there is human error, but I mean, I think we are going to do amazing things personally. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Awesome. Where can people go to learn more about Texas?
Actually, I can post a link to the Texas SFL Facebook page. I think there were some talks about websites. That's not really solidified yet, but definitely on Facebook. Just monitor our Texas SFL Facebook page for now, and any more information will come out through the official channels on there.
Awesome. All right. Thanks very much. So, Liz, tell us a little bit about your activism.
Yeah, so aside from my work with SFL, I'm actually working pretty closely with Liberty.me. Right now I'm actually in a Starbucks in Seattle, which is why my internet's pretty spotty. I'm attending a bunch of conferences and seminars over the summer. So I'm from Canada, in case you guys don't know. I'll be away from now until pretty much the end of August. I'm just going to highlight the great work that all the libertarian organizations have been doing for the students in the movement, and also sharing my experiences in terms of what I'm learning and who I'm meeting at these events. And I'm blogging every few days, so you can follow me at blog@liberty.me.
Awesome. All right. So we can find your stuff there. If anybody wants to find Nathan's stuff as well, go to c4ss.org. He is a senior fellow there and writes all the time, as well as the SFL blog. You'll find some of his stuff. So it seems that we are about out of time. We're just over an hour now, so I think we're going to wrap it up. I want to thank all the viewers and all our guests, Taylor, Nathan, Liz, and Dustin. I really appreciate you all coming on and telling us your thoughts and keeping us up to date on your activism efforts. Yeah, thanks everyone for tuning in for the first episode of SFL Live. We should be back 2 weeks from now. We're going to aim for 2 shows monthly, but you'll definitely hear from us in the meantime and get more details if you want to see the next episode and hear from all your favorite SFLers. So thanks everyone. Take care and good night. Bye.